Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Greetings and welcome to another episode of Canadian History X. If you like, you can support the podcast for as little as $3 a month. Just go to patreon.com/CanadaEHX. You can also donate to the podcast by going to CanadaEHX.com and clicking Donate. Don't forget, I have two other podcasts out there, From John to Justin, which releases every single Friday, and Canada's Great War, which releases every single Sunday. You can find both on all podcast platforms. You can email me at craig@canadaehx.com. Find me on Twitter. My handle is CraigBeard, and you can find me on Instagram. My handle is Beardo37. Today I'm speaking with Carolyn Cox and Tiffany Ayalik. They are the ones behind a great new film called Food for the Rest of Us, which is a feature documentary film that presents 4 stories of people who are leading a revolution to a better world from the ground up. It's an intimate look at the ways marginalized people are using food and farming to liberate themselves from oppression. So we're going to get right to the interview, and we do this a bit differently. I interviewed them separately, so we're going to talk to Tiffany first, and then we're going to talk to Carolyn. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's get right to it. What got you involved with food for the rest of us?
So Caroline and I started working together a few years ago on a TV show called Wild Kitchen. And Caroline, it was her concept that she got inspired by working and living off-grid outside of Yellowknife, 7 hours outside of town, and just really being super in touch with nature and what was seasonal and what was harvestable at the time. And so she had this concept for Wild Kitchen to do sort of a traveling show across the Northwest Territories. And she asked me if I would be the host of it. So that sounded like good fun, traveling around to see cool people and eat interesting food. So that was something right up my alley. And I also have a sort of a wilderness training and adventure tourism background. So it was like a really great fit that we started to work together. And then kind of building off the success of that show, we started to see that not only within the following of fans for Wild Kitchen, but this sort of like outside of the North, this global community of people who do want to be more connected to their food and do want to have land access and, do find it important to understand and be a part of their food and how it comes to their table. So when we started to get a little bit more immersed into this sort of more international and global food community, we started to see that people weren't only using this land connection to feed themselves, but that they were also using it as a very powerful mechanism of change, and that people were using food and their access to food and the food production as a form of activism and liberation from, honestly, some pretty oppressive systems that are in place in terms of how we get our food. So we started to see and really understand that for the most part, within a capitalist system, food is not an exception to how we exploit people and how we people try to make as most money they can with the least amount of expenses. And that often has a very expensive toll on human life and also on planetary health. So we started to see that people, especially young marginalized folks, are the ones who are leading the fight, who are trying to raise awareness and are doing really amazing grassroots work in their own communities. And so that's what inspired us to look at these communities and see that from the high Arctic in Tuktoyaktuk all the way down through middle America into Hawaii, that the food movement looks completely different in all of these places, but at the same time is totally unified and totally coming from the exact same place, no matter where people are from. They want to get back to their land. They want access to healthy food. They want a revival of indigenous land use practices, and they want to inspire equitable interaction within how we get our food. So that's how we got started.
So you do cover quite a large geographical area, like you said, up from the Arctic to Hawaii, into Kansas City, and then Brooklyn. Was there something you were specifically looking for when you were looking for the people to profile? Because again, you also have a wide variety of very interesting people that you look at.
Yeah, we were so blessed to be able to find these people and these stories. And we did lots of research and lots of outreach. And if people, were a little too camera shy, or if they didn't have time, or they didn't feel like they were a good fit to be in the film, everyone we talked to was so generous in terms of putting us in touch with people who they thought would be really great in the film. So people were so generous in like, I'm not a great person for this project, but you know who you should talk to, so-and-so in Kansas City, or so-and-so in, have you heard about Mao Organic Farm in Oahu? So, people were so great about putting us in touch with other folks who were similarly, who were like-minded. And I think what was really exciting for us was a lot of these folks who are doing this work feel quite isolated in the work that they're doing. It can be very focused. It can be like hyper local. And so I think people can often feel pretty alone and isolated and siloed in the work that they're doing. And so when we approached people and were explaining about like, okay, well, these are the people who are also in this, in our film, this high Arctic, tiny little geodesic greenhouse that's in Tuktoyaktuk on the northern, on the Arctic Ocean, people, it kind of blew their mind to know that even if they haven't met them, even if, they might not ever meet them, hopefully once COVID, kind of lets us travel, we can have everybody from the film get together. But even if they don't meet them, there's a kinship, and there's a real affinity to know that there are other people in the world doing that really great work. So it was kind of fun to be kind of reaching out these tendrils of the film as we were doing this research to see who was super excited to be part of it, and who had, like a pretty badass story that we really felt like we wanted to highlight and lift them up in the work that they're doing.
Was there any particular story from anybody that really kind of stuck with you in the process of making this?
Oh, each of them, it's so completely different, and each of them hits a different little part of my heart every time I watch, their segments. And I'm Inuk. I'm from the high Arctic, and that was a beautiful experience to be able to see Inuit on film. We're a majority-owned Inuit production company, and it was just really great to be thinking about the possibility that, more Inuit can be involved in the film industry. Inuit portrayals of the high Arctic and Inuit life can be, respectfully portrayed. That's relational and not exploitive and transactional. So it was just really beautiful to be able to see, my homelands depicted next to this beautiful, lush Hawaiian, tropical paradise. And each location is cultivating their own little paradise in their own way. So, and the story, the people, it is about the food, but it is definitely about like how they're cultivating food and land practice. But at their core, these people are beautiful people who are just wanting to do good in the world, and that hits different every time, and I'll never get tired of seeing that.
As we deal with the serious threat of climate change, what role does our disconnect from our food sources play in that?
I think it plays a huge role in that, because if first of all, if we don't have any connection to the land, if we don't have any connection to nature, A, we're not going to notice it when things start to change, and B, we're not going to care when we don't have connection to something that we never thought was important or never had in the first place. So I think it's just on a strictly land-based connection, to have access to green space, to have access to wildland is so important, because that's how we firsthand will experience the changes that are happening. And in a very distressing era of people denying the effects of climate change are mostly people who, live in cities and who live in like really urban centers, who frankly like probably wouldn't notice. But when we see, especially in Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk, that they have to relocate people from the shore because the ocean is literally swallowing up the land, and it's completely changing landscape, and their communities are falling into the ocean. And that is, you can't deny that. That is a direct correlation to, rising sea levels and changes in the weather. New fish and new species are coming up to the high Arctic that were never there before, and are kind of, they're not native to the area. And, if you don't have, if you're not a fisher, if you're not a hunter, you don't know that. So you won't notice these warning signs that are all around us. And I feel like if we want to make a big dent in sort of turning the tide, if that's even still possible, an important part is for us to be more locally minded and to support our local farmers, support local food producers and harvesters, because they're the ones that are doing really excellent work feeding our communities, and they have the lowest carbon footprint. If we think about the carbon footprint, the cost of the fuel that it takes to ship an avocado from Mexico up to Inuvik, simply telling people, well, everyone should eat a plant-based diet is not a possibility for everybody. So I think what's really important is to be aware of the diversity of solutions, that we have to be reflective of the diversity of the landscapes and the diversity of the people, because that monocrop answers, monoculture answers are part of the reasons that we are in this mess that we're in. So we need diversity of solutions. We need local, hyper local solutions that these folks are doing, that we're really trying to highlight.
Going from one disaster to another with COVID-19, what impact has it had on marginalized people and people who maybe don't have access to proper, good, healthy food because maybe where they live or because they just don't have the land to grow it on?
COVID has been an incredible force for bringing to light pre-existing inequalities that marginalized people have been speaking about for years. So I feel like COVID accentuated everything: the good in people, the bad in people, the greed in people, the barriers that people are facing. Everything became hyper visible and hyper kind of accentuated, I think, during COVID. And I think something that many of us have experienced was the panic of like, we have to go grocery shopping. We have to hoard our food. Overnight, seeing grocery stores picked completely bare, not a roll of toilet paper in sight. Like, when seeing that people's only source and access of food was grocery stores, we were in a pretty bad situation at the beginning of the pandemic, because overnight we saw how fragile our food systems are and how disconnected we are from the food that we on a good day have access to. So we are only, a couple of disasters away from like, where is our food coming from? And especially in isolated communities like Hawaii or the high Arctic, if commercial shipping and imports to Hawaii of food, if there was a natural disaster and if those stopped, something like in 10 to 12 days, Hawaii wouldn't have any food. If they're only 70% dependent on imports for their food supply, one or two bad things happen, and where are we getting that food from? Same in the Arctic. A lot of these communities are sort of landlocked and don't have a highway access to them, so everything is either barged in or flown up. And the bad weather can be, a pretty tricky thing to navigate, especially in the shoulder seasons. And only having one source of food is pretty tricky, especially when you're dependent on an outside source for that. So I think the pandemic really, really highlighted our need globally to be a bit more local in how we're feeding ourselves. And everybody was making bread, and sourdough was a thing, and everybody was sprouting their little celery on their windowsills and things like that. And those are small things, but they're important to feel like secure and able to feed ourselves, that we need to know where this food comes from. And if we don't have access to local food, we better get on that pretty darn quick.
Absolutely. In the release that I was sent, you had a really good quote. Food is medicine, food is politics, and now food is activism. Can you tell me a bit about what you mean by that?
So I think that, food for our health, that was it Aristotle who first said that food is medicine, or the first white guy to say that, I guess. So, this notion that food as medicine, almost as a preventative, like what's the health of our bodies of food that we're putting into it? And recently, I don't know if you've heard the sort of the funny joke news about Buttergate, and how all of a sudden everyone's like, has anyone else noticed that their butter is like not as soft at room temperature anymore? And people started to look into it, and lo and behold, there's apparently people are introducing more palm oil into cow feed so that it's producing more butter because everybody's at home baking bread, and that it's like less healthy than just like straight up butter would be, because it's full of palm oil, and it's horrible for us and for the environment. And little things like that, where it's food is medicine. It's delicious. It's like it's enjoying food together is a type of medicine, when you're coming together and breaking bread, or being in community with each other, laughing as we eat. All of those things are medicine to your heart and your soul and your body. And if food doesn't exist in a vacuum, where we get it is extremely political, and it's not just an innocuous piece of food. If you sort of follow the footprints of who is connected to that piece of food that you're having on your toast, or who is connected, what is the human cost? Are they being paid a fair wage? Is this essentially modern day slave labor? What kind of chemicals is that operation putting into the earth? If you're thinking that almond milk is a cruelty-free alternative to cow's milk, is that actually true? And if we look at, the ongoing drought in California, the declining bee population, these are not simple things that, all of a sudden it's a plant, so therefore it's not cruel, or it's better for the environment. Those are things that we've been marketed to. We've been told those things, but really, if we take a objective look and see the real human cost that's associated, it isn't cruelty free. There's a lot of food that is incredibly cruel that we don't really think a lot about, and so we have to, I think a important part of this developing mindfulness around food is looking at where we get these things from. Is this chocolate, is the chocolate that we're eating harvested by children? So it's just things like that, where food doesn't exist in a vacuum, and we need to be conscious and aware of where it's coming from. And so that's the sort of politics that's involved as well. And then, recognizing that is a huge part of food, is people using it as activism to raise awareness for, the inequalities that we're promoting through our food choices. And especially in an era where, people are, in Idle No More, in, Black Lives Matter, we're in a political awakening, a reckoning of these historical inequalities that cannot go any farther, and to think that food isn't a part of that is not accurate. So we need to also see how our food choices are contributing to inequality as well.
What do you hope people get out of watching the film once they finish the film and gone home, or I guess in today's case, turned off the computer? What do you hope is kind of in their mind after they've watched it?
I hope that people walk away from the film feeling incredibly inspired to even do small things to get more engaged with their food and where it comes from. And I hope that people can start to look to their own communities and see, okay, who are the movers and shakers where I live? Who are the people who are doing this really amazing work that I can support, even in my small way? What are these easy access entry ways into the food movement, so that I can be a part of the solution? And I hope that it just helps, even with a small paradigm shift, with a small attitude change, that this is something that maybe people haven't thought about before. And I hope people go to the farmers market, support their local growers, continue to think a little bit more local, and that all of those things will help contribute to this change in the tide. And then I hope also people kind of, get to see themselves. And I'm hoping that lots of young, active, marginalized, BIPOC, Indigenous, queer folks can see this and be like, oh my goodness, I've never seen myself depicted in this way before and represented, and I feel seen in the work that I'm doing. So I hope people are very inspired and feel reflected in the work that they're doing.
And now that we've heard from Tiffany, we're going to speak to Carolyn.
What kind of led you to decide to start making food for the rest of us?
Yeah. So the first project I did on my own as a filmmaker in the Northwest Territories was a show for the Northern Cable Channel called Wild Kitchen. And that's where I actually met Tiffany, and she was the host and I was the director. And that show did quite well. We got a pretty big following, like both online, and an American network picked up the episodes we shot. And so like the following just kept growing. And then Tiffany and I decided to form a production company together over time. And so we were kind of spitballing ideas back in 2019 when we were just a little baby company, brand new company. And Tiffany had been following this guy, Eric Person, on Instagram, who was using farming as a form of activism. And so she mentioned that in one of our meetings, and I was just it really struck a chord with me. And so right away we started developing the concept for a feature film. And over that winter of 2019, we did have a few good meetings in Toronto. And, there was some interest, but no one had really pulled the trigger. And then we got the Talent to Watch funding in June of 2019. And so we just decided to go for it on like a smaller budget, because that's the micro budget program through Telefilm. And so that's kind of how it all started. And then once we got that funding, it just very quickly went into action. And we also knew we wanted to film in Tuktoyaktuk around the greenhouse, which has a very short growing season up in the high Arctic. So that was part of also why we just like jumped on filming. And it's really good that we did, because then the pandemic happened. So if we hadn't really because a lot of the other films that got funding that year actually had to get put on hold. So it was just like a real just luck on our end that we jumped on it so quickly.
So the film kind of covers 4 different people from a wide variety, like you said, Tuktoyaktuk, out in Hawaii, then in Kansas City, and all over the place. How did you kind of decide who you were going to profile in this film?
Yeah. Again, that happened like fairly quickly. We just started doing some research, some Google searches, and like we'd reach out to certain folks, and if they felt shy about being on camera or didn't feel like it was a good time for them to be on like in a project like this, they were really generous to sort of point us in other directions. And so we got some development funding from the Northwest Territories, from the Film Commission. And we got it probably like early March, and we had to spend it by the end of March because of the fiscal year. So I just like jumped on a plane and went to some of the places that ended up being in the film. And like even with Mao in Hawaii, like we'd emailed them twice and we hadn't heard back. So I actually went to their farm and like knocked on the door basically and was like, hey, I'm a filmmaker from Canada. And I spent a day like working on the farm and getting to know some of the folks there. And then 2 days later, they invited me back with my camera to shoot some development footage, because we didn't know then that we were going to get the funding. Yeah. So it was just really conceptual. But yeah, so really as far as finding the folks, it was just a matter of, that's just where sort of the breadcrumbs led us. And we did find some really engaging, passionate, interesting folks. And we also wanted to really keep a sort of youthful perspective, which of course, like not everyone in the film is young, but it was important for us to have that voice.
What were some of the challenges with covering such a wide variety of people across such a large geographical area?
Yeah, like it was important to us that we followed these stories from different perspectives and different backgrounds. So we had to just keep things really light, like keep a small crew and be very strategic about what we were filming so that we could kind of just drop in, film for two to 3 days and then leave again. And then we went to Tuk twice. So I happened to be in the Northwest Territories. So I went back up and filmed because COVID wasn't as severe in the north, but the borders were all shut. So it was like, yeah, so that was one location where we filmed twice, but generally we just went in to each place once because that was all we had a budget for. So I guess the challenge was just like the cost, to bring a crew over. And also being my first feature film and my first time filming in the United States, just like the carnets, like the bringing a crew across the border, getting insurance for everyone. It was like kind of a new world for me that I had to navigate. So it was a lot to figure out in a short period of time, but we did
it. Right now, a lot of people don't grow their own food. Obviously, they go to the grocery store and they don't think too much about where their food's coming from. So with this film, are you hoping that people see more of the importance of growing your own food and how it can be, good for you, but also good for the environment and good for your community.
Yeah, for sure. That's a huge hope of like what motivated a lot of the project and on the like for me personally, because I have had the fortune of growing my own food and also living in like a wilderness setting where I'm eating a lot of
Mhm.
wild food. And I think that when you can connect land, especially the land right around where you are, there's just like I don't want to get too hokey, but like spiritually, it's very fulfilling and you just feel that much more connected to what you're eating. And yeah, I mean, I won't get too deep into it, but I think there's a lot of value in that. But I do know that not everyone has access to land. That's a big
Mhm.
thing, especially in urban centers. And then also part of what our film touches on is like some people don't have access to land because of systems that keep them out of their reach, keep that access to land out of their reach. So I hope people will be inspired to grow their own food, but then also think about how like is there access to land? Is there access to healthy food for lower income people and racialized people? Like just to really take a step back and start to ask those questions. But then also if they can grow food on their own independently, I highly encourage it. I think it's very fulfilling.
Is there a disconnect with people these days? Just because, you mentioned growing things regionally, the fact that we can get bananas any time of year. I'm in Edmonton and we can't grow bananas here, but I can get bananas anytime I want. So is there a disconnect that we have because we don't spend a lot of time outside growing our food and learning from, our seasons and our ecosystem, what can grow around us?
Yeah, I think there's a disconnect, and I don't think people like it's hard to feel bad about it. Really, though, but even for myself, having grown up in a rural area on a farm, it wasn't until I lived out like 7 hours from Yellowknife, and I realized how cyclical people lived off of the land out there. Like, for example, in the spring, when all the root vegetables are starting to run low and the garden hasn't come in, that's when people are eating like the little sprouts from the forest.
Mhm.
And I just hadn't had exposure to that. And it was really eye opening to me to see, like, cyclically within the year, how connected people were to the earth. Um, and yeah, it's like I can't really say stop eating bananas because I eat bananas too, so it's like a much bigger
Mhm.
thing of like we do live in a global economy. There's no like quick easy answer to that question, but I do think that if you can find locally sourced food, there's environmental reasons why that's really beneficial, but it also supports local economy, or even if you're growing yourself, like we talked about, it can be very fulfilling. Yeah, so just things for people to think about.
Of the four people that you talked to, was there a particular story that really stuck out to you or an experience during the filming that really kind of stuck with you?
Hmm. It's hard to pick one because I really got a lot out of each location. I think some of the things Zuria was saying, who she's the female kosher butcher, about existing in a male world and how it can be scary sometimes, and to just really follow what you believe in. Like for myself, in some of the situations in my life, I have felt like maybe one of the only girls in the room, but I still felt really driven to do what it was that I was passionate
Mhm.
about. So on a personal level, I think I related to Zuria's story quite a bit, but man, there was just so much to learn in each location. I know that when we were in Hawaii at Mao Organic Farm, especially, I'm the only non-Indigenous person on our film crew. And I'm from the Northwest Territories. And it was just very cool to bring folks from the high Arctic down to the South Pacific, or well, Middle Pacific, and still Northern Hemisphere. But anyway,
Mhm.
bring them down to Hawaii and just have them have a chance to connect with each other and talk about their ancestral practices and their farming practices and their harvesting practices. There's a interesting connection between the Inuit in the high Arctic and the people in Hawaii because they're both ocean people. So it was just really cool to watch that interaction.
Has the pandemic, COVID, has it shown us the importance of people having access to things like healthy food or food that they can grow themselves without having to go to the grocery store and possibly risking exposure?
Yeah, exposure, supply chains, even the way that some of the farms maybe don't treat their workers that well, or their living conditions are substandard, which also creates like more opportunity for the virus to spread. So there's real ethical issues there. I think the pandemic opened a lot of people's eyes to how fragile our current system is, where you have these monocultures and you have these big systems, and like once you pull a peg out of this big machine, it doesn't adapt so quickly because it's like a big monoculture, and like diversity is what strengthens things, and so we need more diversity. And I think the pandemic has given everyone on the earth, really, like, it's crazy how global it really is, but just a minute to take a step back and ask ourselves how we can maybe be living differently going forward into like a post-pandemic world. And so in that sense, I think the timing of the film is quite interesting. Like we filmed before the pandemic was happening, but we were cutting it in post-production during the pandemic. And I think some of the themes are very timely, of like what can we learn from like how things used to be done? And then also as a society, how we interact with each other, that maybe we can change some of our practices and be healthier and be stronger and be more prepared for adaptability.
You mentioned that you were able to at least get the filming done before the pandemic hit, but did the pandemic cause any kind of hiccups or anything like that in the process of editing and kind of distributing the film?
Yeah, it was so with Wild Kitchen and some of my other projects, I actually was also the editor. And so this was my first time working with an editor. So even there was like a learning curve of how to, collaborate with someone. And then with the pandemic, it all went virtual. So, and also our editor has 2 kids who are now being homeschooled, and like his time just got less. So slowed down. I thought the film would be done sooner, basically, but it just had to be that way. But also, I think because I hadn't done a film before, like, it was hard. It was a lot of hours on Zoom, which can get very tiring. And then a lot of just like trying to navigate like edits on a timeline, which unless you're in the room with someone, like, it's just really tough. So that was hard, but I think because I had nothing to compare it to, I just put my head down and kept working and made the most of it. So maybe if I had more experience, like sitting in a cushy editing suite, but I've never had that experience. So it was just like, okay, well, this is how we're doing it. So.
And the last question is just for people, it's coming out, I think, May 6th, it's premiering. How can people find it if they want to watch it, if they want to learn more about it? We're on social media or website.
Yeah, so it's premiering at Doxa, May 6th to the 16th, which is a Vancouver-based festival, but because of COVID, it's virtual, and it's actually geo-blocked to all of Canada. So it's kind of exciting because now folks from all over Canada can check out the film. And there's tickets on the Doxa website. And we also have a link on our film website, which is foodfortherestofus.org. And so along with tickets, there's also a little bit of information about the characters in our film and some of the organizations that are associated with. And we've posted a couple farming tutorials for people who want to try to start farming more from the lens of the Northwest Territories, where there's like less fertile soil and some other challenges. But I think, like there's a worm composting tutorial. So anyone, anywhere could start worm composting. But yeah, so it's like, there's a lot on the website beyond just talking about the film, if folks want to check that out. And then we're on Instagram and Facebook as well. Food for the Rest of Us. So
I hope you enjoyed those 2 interviews, and if you did, please leave a rating and review. If you like, you can reach me through email at craig@canadaehx.com. You can also visit my website where you'll find hundreds of articles on Canada's history, as well as all my podcast episodes. Just go to canadaehx.com. And don't forget, you can support the podcast through Patreon. There are multiple tiers to choose from, all with great benefits. You can support the podcast for as little as $3 a month, just like all of these wonderful patrons have, and I apologize if I mispronounce any names. Doug Campbell, Reg W., Deborah Carlson, Francis Helbling, Randall McCallum, Diane Wade, Lorianne Kirby, Gary Dolovich, Nick Zinri, Shannon Marshall, Clinton Martinez, Dimitri Shove, Aaron O'Hara Myers, Robert Dunseith, Todd Casey, Catherine Roy, Luke S., J.P. Bear, Jason Hall, Phil Maynard, and Iris Gray. Thanks, and we'll see you again next time.